What if the only thing standing between you and the life you actually want is the hour your alarm goes off? Not your talent, not your connections, not how much money is in your pocket, just the time you choose to open your eyes. There is a man who proved this with nothing but a broken alarm clock, a single pair of worn shoes, and a decision he made one cold morning that most people would laugh at. He had no plan, he had no savings, he had no one in his corner telling him he could do it. But at 5 a.m., when the rest of the world was still buried under blankets, he was already awake. And that single quiet habit, waking up before the sun, turned out to be the most powerful weapon he ever picked up. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you are going to understand exactly why 5 a.m. is not just a time on a clock, it is a turning point.
In a small industrial town in the Pacific Northwest where fishing boats lined the docks and the air always smelled like salt and diesel, there lived a 27-year-old man named Marcus. Marcus worked at a seafood processing plant. 6 days a week, he stood in a cold, damp room sorting and packing fish for 10 hours a day. His hands were raw, his back ached by noon, and by the time he dragged himself home each evening, he could barely keep his eyes open. He lived in a tiny studio apartment above a thrift store on the edge of town. The walls were thin, the roof leaked when it rained. He owned almost nothing: a second-hand mattress, a few plates, a radio that only picked up one station. But what hurt Marcus the most was not the poverty itself. It was the feeling that nothing he did was ever going to change any of it. He was stuck, and he knew it. And every single day that he walked into that plant, the feeling got heavier.
Marcus's father had worked in the same town his whole life, doing odd jobs that paid just enough to survive. His mother had passed away when he was 12, and after that, the household ran on silence and routine. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, repeat. There was no conversation about the future. There were no dreams spoken out loud. Marcus had grown up believing, without ever questioning it, that this was simply how life worked for people like him. People in his town did not become something. They simply endured. He had watched older men in the plant carry that same quiet resignation in their eyes, men who'd been packing fish for 15, 20 years, and who spoke about their lives the way someone might describe waiting for a bus. Nothing exciting, nothing hopeful, just waiting. And Marcus, at 27, was becoming one of them. The shift in Marcus's life did not begin with a grand moment. It did not begin with a stranger handing him an opportunity or a piece of luck falling into his lap. It began with exhaustion. One evening, after a particularly brutal shift, Marcus came home, ate a piece of stale bread, and fell asleep before the sun went down. He was so tired that his body simply shut itself off, and the next morning, something unusual happened. He woke up at 4:58 in the morning. No alarm, no one calling him, just his own body, rested and quiet, pulling him out of sleep 2 full hours before he needed to be at the plant. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in a long while, his mind was not flooded with dread. It was calm. And in that calm, a small thought arrived. What am I going to do with this time?
That first morning, Marcus did not do anything productive. He simply sat outside his apartment on a cracked concrete step and watched the sky. The stars were fading. The sky was turning from black to a deep, quiet blue. The town was completely silent, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt like the world was giving him something that no one else was awake to receive. He sat there for almost an hour, doing nothing, thinking nothing in particular, just breathing. And when he finally stood up and walked to work that morning, something felt different. He could not name it, but it was there. That evening, he went to bed early again, and the next morning his body woke him at the same time, 5 a.m. He sat outside again, and the morning after that, and the one after that.
Within a week, it had become a pattern, not one he forced, but one his body and his quiet mind seemed to demand. Science backs up what Marcus was feeling without knowing the words for it. Research has consistently shown that the early morning hours, particularly between 5 and 7 in the morning, represent a window when the brain is at its sharpest. The body releases a surge of cortisol shortly after waking, a hormone that naturally boosts alertness, focus, and mental clarity. Harvard Business Review has noted that early risers tend to be more proactive, meaning they spend more of their time creating the conditions for a better life, rather than simply reacting to whatever the day throws at them. Marcus was not reading research papers, he was not following a system, he was simply sitting in the silence and letting his mind do what it had been starved of for years. He was letting it rest without noise, and in that rest, something was quietly beginning to grow.
By the end of the second week, Marcus started to fill the morning hour with something intentional. It started small. He began walking. Not far, just around the edges of the town, along the waterfront where the boats were tied up and the water was still. The air was cool and clean in a way it never felt during the heat of the day. Studies published through UCLA Health have shown that walking even short distances in the early morning can reduce symptoms of depression by a significant margin, and that the mental health benefits become apparent with as few as 1,000 steps a day. Marcus did not know this. He only knew that by the time he finished his walk and arrived at the plant each morning, his mind felt clearer than it had in months. The fog that had lived behind his eyes for years was lifting, slowly, one morning at a time. Around the third week, something shifted in the way Marcus saw the world around him. He had been so consumed by the routine of survival, wake up, work, eat, sleep, that he had never truly looked at the town he lived in. But those early mornings gave him time to observe. He noticed things. He noticed that the small shop owners who opened before everyone else seemed to do better than the ones who opened late. He noticed that the older fisherman who woke before dawn always had the freshest catch, not because he was stronger, but because he was up first. He noticed that the world rewarded the people who showed up before it was crowded, before the noise started, before everyone else was competing for the same thing. And for the first time, Marcus began to wonder if there was a lesson in that, a lesson meant for him.
Discipline is not something you were born with. It is something you build, one small decision at a time. And the earliest, quietest decision you can make each day is the decision to get out of bed when your body wants to stay in it. Research from the University of Westminster has found that people who maintain consistent early morning routines develop a stronger sense of personal control over their lives. That sense of control is not about power or money. It is about the feeling that you are the one steering your own life, not just being carried along by it. For Marcus, that feeling was transformative. He had spent years feeling like life was something that happened to him. Every morning that he dragged himself to the plant, every evening that he collapsed into bed with nothing to show for the day, it all felt like a current he could not fight against. But those 5 a.m. mornings were teaching him something no one had ever taught him before. They were teaching him that he had a choice, a real, quiet, daily choice. By the end of the first month, Marcus had begun to use his mornings for more than walking. He started paying close attention to the people around him who seemed to be doing better than he was, not out of jealousy, out of curiosity. He watched, he listened, he asked questions, carefully and respectfully whenever he could. One morning, after his walk, he stopped at a small hardware store near the docks where a man named Mr. Patterson sold nets and basic supplies to fishermen. Mr. Patterson was awake every morning before the sun. He was always calm, always organized, and his small shop had been growing steadily for years. Marcus gathered his courage and asked him, simply, how he had built what he had. Mr. Patterson looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. He said, "I woke up early, and every morning I used that time to think about the next day before the next day arrived. That is the secret. It is not complicated. Most people just never do it." Those words stayed with Marcus longer than anything else anyone had ever said to him. He went home that evening and sat with them. The next morning at 5 a.m., he did not just walk, he sat and he thought. He thought about the plant. He thought about the work he did every day, sorting and packing fish, and he started to ask himself a question that he had never asked before. Is there a way to do this better? Not just the physical work, the whole process. He had watched the supervisors at the plant argue about lost shipments, spoiled stock, and disorganized records for months. It was chaos. And in that chaos, Marcus saw something that most people walked right past. He saw a problem that no one was solving. And for the first time in his life, he felt something dangerous stir inside him. It was called ambition. The fourth week of Marcus's 5 a.m. routine was when his mornings became a workshop. Every morning, before the town woke up, he sat with a borrowed notebook and a pen and began to write down ideas. Not grand ideas, small, practical ones. He wrote about the problems he saw at the plant, the way fish were being stored incorrectly, leading to waste, the way records were kept by hand in a messy system that no one could follow, the way the supervisors spent hours each week trying to find information that should have taken minutes. He wrote about solutions he had seen in the way Mr. Patterson ran his shop, simple systems, clear routines. He was not inventing anything new, he was simply paying attention for the first time and writing down what he saw. And those quiet mornings, those 2 hours before the world demanded anything from him, were giving him the space to think in a way that the noise of the day never could.
Around day 38, Marcus decided to act on one of his ideas. It was a small step. He noticed that the way fish were being labeled and sorted at the plant was causing delays every single day. Workers spent time searching for things that should have been in one place. So Marcus, on his own time, created a simple system. He drew it out in his notebook first, mapping out where each type of fish should go, how they should be labeled, and how the records should be kept. Then, one morning before his shift, he came in early and quietly reorganized one section of the processing floor according to his plan. He did not tell anyone, he did not ask for permission, he just did it. And by the end of that day, the supervisors noticed. The section Marcus had reorganized was running faster than every other section in the plant. No one knew why at first, but it did not take long for word to reach the floor manager, a serious man named Mr. Collins, who ran the plant with precision and very little patience for waste. Mr. Collins called Marcus into his office the next morning. It was a small room with a metal desk and a single window that looked out over the harbor. Marcus stood there, his hands still rough from years of work, and waited. Mr. Collins studied him for a moment, then asked, plainly, "How did you come up with that system?" Marcus told the truth. He said he had been waking up at 5 a.m. every morning for over a month, and that during those quiet hours he had been watching, thinking, and writing down ideas. Mr. Collins said nothing for a long time. Then he leaned forward and said something that Marcus would never forget. "I have been running this plant for 12 years, and no one, not one person, has ever walked in here with a solution. They all walk in with complaints. You are the first person to walk in with an answer." He paused. "Keep doing what you are doing, and keep bringing me answers." Over the next few weeks, Marcus brought Mr. Collins 3 more ideas. Each one was simple. Each one worked. The waste at the plant dropped. The speed of production increased. The workers, who had been frustrated by chaos for years, began to notice that things were running smoother. And Marcus, who had spent his entire working life feeling invisible, was suddenly being seen. Not because he shouted or demanded attention, because he had spent his mornings, in silence, building something that no one else had bothered to build. A study from the University of Toronto found that people who wake up early and use that time with intention report significantly higher levels of life satisfaction and a stronger belief in their own ability to create change. On day 67 of his 5 a.m. routine, Mr. Collins called him into the office one final time. The plant owner, a man who rarely visited the floor, had been watching the changes for weeks. He had seen the numbers improve. He had seen the waste disappear, and he had asked Mr. Collins directly who was behind it. That afternoon, Marcus listened as the words were spoken that changed his life. The plant was expanding. They needed someone to oversee the organization of the entire facility, someone who understood the work from the ground up, someone who had proven, quietly and without fanfare, that he could solve problems no one else was willing to touch. The position came with a new title, a new salary, nearly 3 times what Marcus had been earning, and a future that 2 months ago he could not have imagined. Marcus sat in that small office, looking out at the harbor through the single window, and for the first time in his life, he did not feel stuck. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And it had all started at 5 a.m. on a cracked concrete step, with nothing but silence and the slowly changing sky. Success is not a destination, it's a daily practice, and that practice begins tomorrow at 5 a.m. Will you be awake? Your future self is waiting on the other side. Don't make them wait another day.